Whoops.
I meant to tell you not to drop that too. I'm sorry.
So, Ed,
It's 1 minute, okay. A good morning to all. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the First Wilmington Church of Wilmington, Delaware. We are grateful for your presence, whether you're here in the sanctuary or joining us online. My name is Ed Ostrom, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate this morning. During my years in the military, I served with a lot of guys from the South. One of their more common expressions was y'all. It spoke to one person or a whole host of persons. It referred to anyone within earshot. Y'all sees no color, has no politics, no age limitations, no creed, no discrimination. Y'all is an all-encompassing, and so when I say to you, y'all are welcome, the words cover everyone within earshot, children, youth, and adults. So this morning, I say to you, y'all are welcome. If you are new to our congregation, we are especially grateful that you found us. Our hope is to find ways to connect with you. At this church, we work to embody love and compassion, growth and discovery, freedom and justice, wonder and joy. Here we learn and grow together and try to live our values out in public. If you found us online for the first time, why, we encourage you to contact our administrator, Marina, at firstuuwilmington.org. That's Marina at firstuuwilmington.org, so that we can include you in our regular email news blasts to let you know about all of the upcoming learning and fellowship opportunities here. And now, let's settle ourselves into this time of worship with this, the morning prelude.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Pierce, and Ed, since I spent a lot of time in the South and earlier in my life, I want to welcome y'all to this worship service this morning. If y'all are new, welcome. If I haven't seen you in a while, welcome. And let this be a time that uplifts our hearts, draws our connection to one another, and gives us the energy and the spirit to move through the weeks ahead. Our call to worship: come in, all who long to know how to love this world, how to keep eyes open, hands unclenched, arms wide, breathing deeply in and out. This is a time to practice, because there is still so much good and beauty and joy in this world. Let us affirm that beauty, that good, and that joy together. This morning, I have to make a sad announcement. Some of you have not heard this, but our member, Reverend Kathy Thomas, died on Friday. So Reverend Catherine or Kathy Davis Thomas was known by members of this congregation. She served as a director of religious education of this congregation, and she was ordained into the Unitarian Universalist ministry by First Unitarian Church of Wilmington in 1996. She went on to serve in mostly interim positions at the UU Fellowship of Hartford County in Churchville, Maryland, Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland, Mainline Unitarian Church in Devon, Pennsylvania, First Unitarian Society of Plainfield, New Jersey. So our heart goes out to her family, including our member, Karen Thomas. A memorial service is being planned sometime this spring. So as I light this candle of remembrance, let us pause to remember Reverend Kathy Thomas, and may her life continue to be a blessing that radiates to us and through us in this world. So may it be.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me in lighting it. Hear the words of Paul Stephen Dodenhoff. For this 1 hour, may we let go of our anxieties, our fears, our anger, our self-doubts, our regrets, and our petty grievances, and our distractions. For only this 1 hour, let the flame of this chalice burn them from our hearts and minds and light our way to peace and serenity. For this 1 hour. Would you please join me in singing hymn 153, "Oh, I Woke Up This Morning." Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
This week I was talking to a member of our congregation, and right before a meeting was to start on Zoom, and she said, "How are you?" And I found myself saying, sometimes it's very hard listening to the radio on my drive to church. Just this morning I was listening to a report of a photographer who was taking photos of various places in Ukraine that had been bombed. And even though I was not seeing the photos that he was describing, just hearing those descriptions was just so very hard. What I didn't say to her is that sometimes having to show up as one who is to give some hope and some inspiration is hard to do. But then I remembered that lamentation is also a form of prayer. Lamentation is the passionate expression of grief or sorrow. So I want to share with you some of my lamentation this morning. You could add to this in your own way. There are innocents, children, women, men, elderly, who are losing their lives, their homes, are being wounded and shattered and traumatized by a senseless and ruthless war in Ukraine. There are people who have been shot and wounded, scared and terrified through one more mass shooting this week in Raleigh and maybe other places I haven't yet heard about. There are those who have attacked our democratic process, who are trying to undermine our democracy in ways that limit our agency, our capacity to use our own voice and our own vote to give direction to this country. There are immigrants and refugees who are being flown from Texas through Florida to Delaware and other states at the cost of probably $1 million for political aims. There are people who each week wonder where their next meal will come from, wonder if they will still be sheltered in a home, wondering whether a health crisis might mean a financial crisis for them, even in one of the richest countries in this world. Let's take a moment to attend to your own lamentation that you would add to mine this morning. And let's remember that even our deepest concerns, our deepest lamentations, show us that we care, which is much better than being numbed by the events of our world. Do you agree? This is where you get to say amen. We are open. We are willing. For to be hopeless would be so strange. It dishonors those who've come before us. So let us be open to the light of change. And during this shared silence, let's gather in our own hearts the concerns that we are holding this morning. Concerns for ourselves, those that we love, or our world. And we'll have a time after the shared silence to share any of those that you would like to share aloud in this sanctuary or on the chat. So let us join now in a time of shared silence. There is so much that we hold in our hearts that we do not need to hold alone. So much that we carry that we do not need to carry alone. So let's take a time now, if you are willing, to speak aloud in this room or write in the chat the particular concerns that you might have. And you may speak them aloud in this room so that your voice adds to the voice of others and can be heard and held by those in this room. What concerns are you holding this morning? For these and all the concerns of our heart, those spoken or unspoken, may there be healing and peace. Amen.
The reading this morning was written by Brene Brown, entitled, "Courage is a Here Word." Correction. Courage is a heart word. She writes, "Courage is a heart word. The root of the word courage is cor, C-O-R, the Latin word for heart. In one of the earliest forms, the word courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Over time, this definition has changed, and today we typically associate courage with heroic and brave deeds. But in my opinion, this definition fails to recognize the inner strength and level of commitment required for us to actually speak honestly and openly about who we are and about our experiences, good and bad.
So some in our congregation have been gathering or soon will be gathering in Soul Matters groups where this month our theme is courage. I'm curious to hear some of what comes out of those groups and some of the stories that are shared. I had the opportunity at the beginning of this month in the new drop-in Soul Conversations group that I'm hosting the first Sunday of the month right after the service, to hear some rich conversations with some of our members on this topic of courage. Some feel like they have courage and others feel like they don't. Some feel like it's something that they move towards and others feel like it's something they resist. Some recognize that courage has been that encouraging, so to speak, voice within them. Sometimes that voice is put on pause, sometimes it is lowered, and sometimes it is amplified. Some of us told stories of those who embodied courage for us in our lives. Others told us of mixed or even mixed up messages that we got from our own families of origin about courage. Some told stories of times when they stepped apart, stepped out, or stepped forward away from the constraints of a particular family's mindset, acceptable mindset, and became themselves more and more a kind of courage that unfolded over time. Sometimes courage takes strength. Sometimes courage takes tenderness. Sometimes courage requires us not to speak. And sometimes courage requires us to speak up. As I look out on any of us this morning, I wonder, what has been your relationship with courage in your life, at different times of your life, at this moment in your own life? I'm always drawn by the stories we have to tell one another when we dare to make the time for that. I believe that we are knitted into relationships by the lessons that we have to share with one another from our own lived experiences. And there's a precious wisdom that gathers, like the drops of rain glistening in the sun on golden autumn leaves that reflect back to us those glimmers of our own life, the suffering that has been endured, the joys that have been realized, and the faith that has been cultivated over time. As we approach the months ahead of us, in our own lives and in the life of this country, I have no doubt that we must cultivate our capacity and our relationship with courage. This will be essential. Now, I can understand if some of us are saying, so fill in the blank could be anything. Wake me up when the midterm elections are over. Any nods? Wake me up when these January 6th hearings have finally made their report. Wake me up when the war in Ukraine has ended. So much is looming over us in all of these various places and events in our lives, our common life as well. Yet, I have to say that if there is a time to wake up, it's now, not after whatever it is over, not later, but waking up now when it really matters is what's important for us. Let's wipe the sleep from our eyes. Let's look boldly at the world together. Let's gather whatever courage we can and brace ourselves for facing the world that is and the world that can become. Courage, among other things, compels us to come alive with no exceptions given, even, I might add, no exceptions because of age. Now, speaking of age, here's a delightful poem about one person's relationship to courage that might lighten the tone of this sermon just a little bit right now. You know this poem, some of you. In the poem, Jenny Joseph seems to imply that our courage could be on a schedule or on a time-released formula. She writes, "When I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me, and I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I'm tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit." Now, that takes a certain kind of courage to step out of the expectations that we've inherited around what's appropriate or not. And these lines by Joseph also point out in the same poem that moving from here to there might actually require practice. So the poem continues, "But now we must have clothes that keep us dry and pay our rent and not swear in the street and set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers, but maybe I ought to practice a little now so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when I am old and start to wear purple." The poem seems to imply that with age, one can then finally become outrageous, bold, or courageous. But I love that line. It is a reason to dive deep and take creative risks. Let me say that again. Age itself, and I would add, old age or young age, doesn't matter. Age itself is no excuse to wade in the shallows. It is a reason to dive deep and take creative risks. Brene Brown explained in the reading that Ed did this morning that we typically associate courage with heroic and brave deeds. But Brown adds that courage also includes recognizing the inner strength and level of commitment that is required. So that's my focus today, that inner strength called courage. The recognition that courage requires inner work as well as courageous action. Let's face it, in order to face the world as it is requires courage. Right? In order to face ourselves as we are, requires courage. In order to move forward, requires courage. We need to have the courage to shift, to pivot personally and collectively beyond our accustomed patterns and our worn-out excuses. It takes courage to pivot. Now, what do I mean by pivot? Well, Shawn Ginwright gives this very helpful physical definition from basketball. He explains that in basketball, a pivot requires 4 interwoven and seamless traits. When a player has the ball, they pivot in order to advance the ball down the court. This pivot requires that they stop momentarily and reflect on what's happening. That they have awareness of the relationships of other players around them. That they maintain focus on the goal without distraction. And they calmly and confidently flow into another direction. We often don't see all of this because it happens so quickly. But these pivots in basketball, I think, work for us off the basketball court as well. In fact, I believe that we need to become practiced at these pivots as we prepare ourselves for the months ahead. So I want to take some time to go into more detail about at least two of these practices or pivots. Let me say a little bit about Shawn Ginwright. He's known, and I quote, as one of the nation's leading innovators and provocateurs. I love that. And I love that word, provocateur. It's like a flair to it. He's also a thought leader on African American youth and activism. He's a professor of education in Africana Studies Department at San Francisco State University. And he's the founder and the CEO of an organization called Flourish Agenda Incorporated. It's an organization whose mission is to design strategies that unlock the power of healing to transform schools and communities. Yeah, wow, I agree with you. And he's the author of the book, The Four Pivots, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves. In exploring these four pivots, Ginwright is exploring the intersection between personal reflection and social action, between personal healing and social healing. Oftentimes in Unitarian Universalist circles, I've recognized people may define themselves sometimes as oriented towards spiritual development or social action. And Ginwright exposes that short-sightedness of such a dichotomy. In fact, he argues that such an artificial division contributes to our stuckness and our inability to engage in the deep change that our particular times require. He argues for pivots, which I think of like fundamental shifts in how we approach our own lives and the social problems that we face. Now, oftentimes we might approach some of the social problems that we face with shallow solutions. Just anything that we can do, anything that seems most accessible. However, deep change cannot be achieved by shallow solutions. I'll explain. Although the solutions that we use are not insignificant, they don't always engage with the root of the problems that we're trying to solve. Examples that Ginwright gives include these, which I quote, "We address racist policies but never address the xenophobic fear that created them. We can respond to gender inequality, but we leave unscathed the toxic masculinity that created it. When we focus on part of an incremental change, in Ginwright's perspective, it's not enough. It's a surface solution to a much deeper problem, since it doesn't address some of the underlying causes that contribute to the unconscious biases that often lead to police violence." I hope you're hearing me. The solutions are helpful, and they're part of incremental change. But they're not enough because we need to engage in a deeper change that brings together both those kind of solutions, but also some of the personal healing that we need to do alongside of those changes. Such deep change that addresses some of the root causes will require us to include in our work for social change some of the practices that shift us as well. So he names some pivots, two of which I'll address today. I think that's all you can handle. I'll do the two others in a week or so. So the first pivot is similar to what was described in the basketball example, when the player stops momentarily and reflects on what is happening. The pivot is described as a pivot in our awareness from lens to mirror. He explains it in this way. Instead of viewing the world through a thick lens, that is, as analysts of social problems, we must also view it as a mirror of ourselves. This involves the practice of self-reflection and exploration of who we are as individuals and how we contribute to the world that we wish to create. Rather, as something that's out there, also look at it as something that's in here. What would it be like for us to reverse our focus from only looking through our lens to see all the problems that are out there, but also, what would it be like to have the courage to look at the mirror and engage in a deeper reflection on ourselves? What obstructions might we have that inhibit our capacity to make the changes that we say we want? Social healing, in other words, requires personal healing. Ginwright invites the activists, the students, the community leaders that he works with, and us, into this deeper change work that he calls mirror work. Now, what happens when you look in a mirror? You see what is, right? You see what is. You get reflected back on what is. Therefore, it sometimes takes courage to look in a mirror at ourselves. Sometimes takes courage to look at a mirror and to look at our part, our contributions in contributing to what are the problems we want to address, but also our part in contributing to the deeper change that our times require. Oftentimes we like to point the finger out there, saying, what can they do? What they must do? And that's only part of the process of deeper change. Activist and scholar Grace Lee Boggs clarifies for us that, and I quote, social change is fundamentally about individual and collective responsibility for creating, imagining, and relating together in new ways. In other words, it's not just out there, it's also in here. It's not just those people that need to take responsibility, it's also us people. It's not just in the future, but as the poet Jenny Joseph articulates in her poem, maybe we ought to just practice a little right now. Mirror work includes recognizing our own participation in creating the world that we want to live in. Mirror work includes practices of asking questions like this that are provided by the author. Where's my life going? And what will it take me to get there? I won't pause too long in between each question because you might actually want to think about it or not. But that is the first question. Where is my life going? And what will it take me to get there? What do I really want in life? And what have I been settling for? Now, the third question moves us towards the social healing part as well. If I could bring about 3 things in our world 10 years from now, what would they be? And what am I learning about myself and how I can better serve our society? So you see, mirror work moves us towards shifting some of our focus from just the outward looking, from just focusing on changing systems or in the suffering that we experience. This external work is absolutely necessary, but it's insufficient because we also need a process of healing our inner world that has been damaged or harmed and injured by social inequality. So social transformation, social healing is also an inside job as well. Ginwright, again, is drawing from a point of view in which social and personal change are braided together. You can't have one without the other. Particularly if we're going to engage in the kind of deep change that's needed at this moment. Sustainable change, radical, root causes that are addressed, and not just surface solutions. The second pivot that Ginwright proposes is related to the first one. It's what he calls the pivot in our connection from being transactional to transformational. In our basketball player example, it's when the player has an awareness of the relationship with the other players on the court. This is a radical shift in the kind of world that we tend to live in. Oftentimes in our social change work, there can be this embedded rule: what can you do for me? What do I want you to do? While important, this is only part of the path forward. We also need to ask what Ginwright calls the right first question. What do we want to become? See how that shifts the conversation? Ginwright is informed by the African perspective made popular by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, known as Ubuntu, which is often translated as, I am because we are. Tutu explains this in this way. One of the sayings in our country is Ubuntu, the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you can't exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. You can't be human all by yourself. And when you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently just as individuals, separated from one another, whereas you are connected. And what you do affects the whole world. When you do well, it spreads out. It's for the whole of humanity. So we are in this together. We are in this together. As we approach the months ahead, we need to practice courage in at least these 2 ways. One, pivot toward awareness that includes not just what is happening out there that needs to change, but also do the mirror work, what needs to shift in me in order to be able to bring about the changes that we want to see. And pivot towards a deeper connection. Resist the tendency to just ask what others need to do for us without also asking that first right question. What do we want to become? Let's just rehearse that question together. What do we want to become? What's the question? Try that over the next few weeks in whatever conversation you find yourself in, and see how it might open up a conversation, might open up some possibilities that otherwise might not occur. So, in that poem, When I Get Old, I Will Wear Purple, I think it's applicable here, these verses, but maybe I ought to practice a little now so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I am, and I would add these from the sermon, when I am not just pointing fingers out there, but also taking a deep look within. When I am asking not just what solutions we would propose to others, but also ask, what do we want to become? When I am reflecting on what I am doing day to day to align my own life with the directions I want my life and our society to go in, aligning my life in the directions I want our society to move towards. And when I am looking for ways to connect, to braid together the personal and the spiritual, when I'm growth with social change. My colleague, Reverend James Cabal Komoto, proclaims this, and I'll quote him. Nurturing our own spiritual growth and nurturing the common good go hand in hand. It's impossible to do one without the other. If you only focus on your own spiritual growth, you will turn into a fatuous bliss ninny. If you focus only on nurturing the common good of the world, you end up burned out and bitter because you are not able to draw upon anything but your own inner reserves, and that's not enough. So hopefully you got some practices for the weeks ahead that will help us cultivate courage among us and within us. Before I leave the pulpit, I do want to make an announcement about an opportunity in our congregation, one that doesn't happen every year, every 3 years, but maybe every 5 years. And that's an opportunity for us to engage as a congregation in planning our course ahead together. So perhaps you've seen the notices about the summit that will be happening November 11th and 12th. Reimagining and reclaiming our future. It's really intended as an opportunity for a cross-section of our congregation to come together, engage in conversation and dialogue about where we've been, where we are now, and which directions do we want to commit to moving forward. So some of you have already signed up. Some of you are going to sign up today, and Jackie, who's in the back, is one of our board members, and she's ready to sign you up to attend that conference. There's also a flyer that gives you a lot more detail than I'm able to give right now. So may it be. Amen.
I asked about our musician this morning, and the lady said, well, you're in for a treat. And indeed we were. Thank you, Linda. When we join this church, nothing is asked of us. However, there are implied obligations that are rarely spoken, but perhaps from time to time they should be. To the extent we are physically, mentally, and financially able, it's an obligation to support one another and this church with our compassion, with our wisdom, with our talents, and yes, with our energy and treasure. Some see this as a multiple choice list, a list where one can select some of these obligations, but that is not so. This list, in part, is an example of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, as we endeavor to practice all of them. And now is the time for us to share in our treasure. And we offer 4 ways as presented on the screen over my head. Please join me in dedicating. Hear the words of Reverend Gary Smith of Concord, Massachusetts. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return no person. Please join me in singing hymn in this book, 1017, Building a New Way.
Strong and every day.
Our benediction this morning is adapted from words by Reverend David Breeden. Courage is a choice. Courage is a way of knowing. Courage is a way of joining together. Courage is knowing that together we will do what none of us can do alone.